Richard Moore, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's good to be here.
This is a broadcast first, of course, the first interview with the serving chief of MI6. And it wasn't that long ago that your name was classified, let alone where you actually work. That was also a state secret. So I suppose my first question has to be, what are you doing here in a radio studio doing an interview?
Well, it's a good question. And the secret in the title of Secret Intelligence Service is going to remain. There are clearly some things that I won't be able to discuss. But over the last 10 years or so, my predecessors have gradually tiptoed into the light a bit. And the reason they've done it and why I'm keen to carry on with it and develop it a bit by coming onto the radio with you today is because I think it's important that people understand the role that we play, insofar as we can talk about it, in keeping people safe on the streets of the UK and in promoting our interests and values overseas.
Now, you also tweet. In fact, you are the first tweeting C, if I can call you that. You do that for what reason? Again, you want to be on the field?
Yeah, look, I think it's for all the same reasons. I was on Twitter before I became chief, and I used Twitter a lot when I was an ambassador. I was ambassador to Turkey, and I found it a great medium because you were able to engage with people. It's not just a broadcast medium. You have a chance for a bit of back and forth. I enjoy a bit of banter. You get some pretty toxic stuff at one level, and you get quite a lot of humorous stuff. In Turkey, they love conspiracy theories, so I just found it a useful way of bashing back against some of that stuff and explaining Britain. And in this context, again, I think it gives me a chance to engage with people on Twitter, talk a bit about the service, talk about some of the things we're trying to do to modernize the service. And so, it was a bit of an experiment, but so far, so good, I think.
And judging by your Twitter timeline, I used to tweet in Turkish on occasion as well. It was quite impressive. Your Turkish is obviously pretty good, better than mine, anyway.
Turkish is all right. It's getting a bit rusty.
Before we get on to the wider world and your views on it and your services activities as far as you can discuss them, of course. Let me just ask you a little bit about your background. You spent a bit of time in the diplomatic service, you've been an ambassador, but you were originally an intelligence officer. You began your career with MI6. How did you get into the business of espionage?
I'm absolutely a professional intelligence officer. I really enjoyed my time working as an ambassador and then working in the Foreign Office, but I've always been an intelligence officer to the core of my soul. And look, I think like many folks leaving university, looking at careers, I was looking around. I did take an interest in journalism and completely and utterly failed. I think I applied to the BBC World Service and got rejected without an interview of any kind. So one looks around, and I kept on coming back to the fact that I wanted to do something overseas. I wanted to do something that would make a difference. And I was approached. So I sort of followed through the application process with SIS, and I've never regretted it. I've loved every minute of the work that I've done.
So with a classic tap on the shoulder, was it at university?
It was at university. I will, even though the gentleman has passed away, I will respect the confidence of the individual who did it. But yes, it was very much the way that people read about. I think he suggested that I might be interested in a parallel career in a parallel field of foreign affairs. I had no idea what he meant. But then I was asked to turn up at some building, rather grand building, just off the Mall. And it all became revealed unto me what I might be getting into.
And you finally knew what you were signing up for.
Absolutely, and I did sign up for it, and I had a brilliant time. There is something about trying to work out who might be prepared to help us. That kind of, if you like, a bit of the thrill of the chase as you try and sort of find a way in which you can get alongside them. And then the fascinating business of working with people, developing a relationship with them, having to do some pretty wild things, after dark on the streets of Islamabad. It's the adrenaline is rushing. So it's a very fulfilling career, and you're doing it for a genuinely good purpose. You know that you're trying to make things just a bit safer
I don't think there's any point in me trying to ask you exactly what it was you were doing on the streets of Islamabad after dark, so I won't, because I know you wouldn't tell me. I understand that. But the service doesn't recruit that way anymore, does it? There's a discreet tap on the shoulder. In fact, you can even apply openly to join MI6. There's an invitation on your website to do that. And I understand you're recruiting for quite a senior new role externally for the first time.
I am. So, you're right, of course. We still take recommendations, but clearly we cast our net much more broadly than Oxbridge colleges these days, rightly so. And we get people drawn in from all around the UK, from all kinds of backgrounds, and that's as it should be. Yeah, you apply online these days, and then we take some care to make sure that once you apply online, you can do so safely, and we can then take the application process forward. So that works well. And for senior appointments, we quite often advertise, and we will shortly be advertising for a role. The role is to be our new Q, in fact. So I'm quite excited about that, about the sort of person we might get to come and join us. I'm hoping that we'll get somebody who probably has got an industry background, who really understands technology at a very deep level, because we need their help. We are in an increasingly contested, difficult world where technology is making what we do for a living more of a challenge. We have to therefore use and harness technology. And the only way we can do that, I think, is with good leadership from somebody who can help us partner with the private sector effectively.
So just for people who aren't aware, Q exists in James Bond films as the guy who makes all the gadgets. You actually have a real life Q. We
do. In this one, life imitates art. So in fact, a few years ago, we were looking to remodel our technical side of it. I mean, a lot of people would identify the GCHQ rightly with being this amazing technology organization, but my own organization, we have a very large technical element to it, and many of my colleagues are technologists. We were reshaping it a few years ago, and we couldn't think of the right name for it. And in the end, we thought, well, come on, let's go for it. And so we decided to call it Q. So we have done ever since, and this will be the leader of that team.
So the original Q was Ian Flemington Bond, and you borrowed from him.
I'm afraid so. We've gone the other way around. C is still C. We've never gone to M.
That was
we have
your
no
original
intention of doing.
Yeah.
So, and I hope that will obviously it will excite a bit of interest, because it is absolutely critical to the modernisation of the service that we get this partnership around technology right. Our traditional model, Tom, has been, if you like, a kind of boffins behind the wire. We've got fantastic people who beaver away and do the most amazing work around developing technology for us. But in the 21st century, that model doesn't scale, and you can't achieve the pace you need in order to stay ahead of your adversaries. So the only way to do that is to be in the mix with technology companies, big and small. And that is going to take us into, I think, some interesting and challenging new areas. And we're going to have to be a little bit more open in terms of that partnering with technology companies than we have been traditionally used to doing. That there will be technology being developed today, Tom, where the people developing it will have no idea that there might be an application for their technology in my world. And so, I need to reach out to these people. And in order to reach out to them, I'm going to have to be, we are going to have to be a little bit more open about who we are.
Fascinating. Let's move on to your actual business end, which is you're a foreign intelligence service, domestic intelligence, domestic security is taken care of by MI5, the police, etc. And your business is international. The integrated review, which was the big Whitehall-wide review of all government foreign policy and security policy, published last month, painted quite a scary view of the world, a world where international sureties can't be relied on any longer. International understandings that we've lived with comfortably, maybe since the Second World War, maybe beginning to crumble. Do you share that slightly troubling worldview?
I think it's undoubtedly a highly contested and in many ways rather dangerous world. Yeah, and I think the integrated review captures that rather well. The thing I like about it, it's not defeatist though. It is, and I understand why you would describe it in the terms you did. but it also sets out a very clear vision of the role that the UK can play. And of course, we'll play our part in that, because we'll help, along with GCHQ and MI5, to defend against those threats wherever they come from. But also in our case, as SIS, one of our jobs, if you like, is to provide a kind of assurance wrapper around some of the more positive, forward-looking stuff. I mean, one of the things which is central to the integrated review is a sense of the UK as a science and technology power, a recognition, I think, that in the 21st century, if you're going to succeed as a country, as a nation, then you're going to have to master certain key technologies. And certainly you're going to have to be in a place where either you or trusted allies have access to those technologies. And that, if you like, plays back into what I was just saying about Q. We have got to be absolutely at the forefront of that.
What's the one single biggest thing that keeps you awake at night now?
I don't, in all honesty, I sleep well, because there are always issues that one is concerned about. So I think, from my perspective, all of this is manageable, as long as we keep doing what some of the stuff that in integrated review says we should do. But mostly the reason why I don't have sleepless nights in this space is because the great advantage we have over the authoritarian regimes is they don't have friends. We have friends, we have allies. And I think there's been a bit of a reassertion of that over the last few months, which I think is welcome here in London. So I honestly don't. There are lots of things, of course, I fret about and I worry about, but overall I remain pretty positive about our agenda.
Let me ask you about a couple of specifics that were actually mentioned in the integrated review. One is the prospect of a CBRN attack, and the review stated that a CBRN, which for people who may not know means a chemical, biological, radiological or nuclear attack, a dirty bomb, I suppose, in layman's terms, being deliverable and being actually quite likely to have happened by 2030. Is that sort of threat something you've actively come across, or your officers have come across elsewhere in the world?
It wouldn't be stated in those terms if we hadn't. I mean, there's clear intent from these types of groups to do us the maximum amount of harm. At the moment, we have been very successful, if you like. I mean, one of the truisms about intelligence work, Tom, is that you get to see our failures, you don't get to see our successes. And that is particularly true in counterterrorism work, where we've worked really, really hard to the point where, awful though these attacks are, they've involved pretty low tech use of vehicles or people acquiring knives and trying to do as much damage as they can. But clearly there is a limit to what you can do, particularly with our brilliant police able to react as fast as they self-evidently do. So these groups are perpetually looking for something which would either be what is called in the trade as a spectacular, a 9/11 type thing, or find some new and innovative way of doing it. And they innovate. They innovate in their use of social media, and they innovate in trying to do us harm. So we're very conscious of it, but we take we do a lot of work to get ahead of that by being able to understand these groups and then disrupt them before they develop the sort of capability that could do us serious harm.
Have you come across actual evidence of a real plot, no matter how far down the line it was, of a CBRN attack directed at the UK?
I'm not going to get into individual intelligence and what we may or may not have uncovered, but I will say, if you like, more generally, Tom, that we have definitely picked up intent from groups like Al-Qaeda and Daesh in the past. To try and find ways of being able to get hold of this CBRN capability. And that's why it's in there. It reflects the fact that we know they're trying. But so far, we've managed to stop them from achieving that.
We're not talking about ancient history here. We're talking about active groups now still trying today, are we?
We're certainly talking about groups which are active. We all know that Al-Qaeda and Daesh, although they've been pretty damaged over the last few years, are still there.
You mentioned Daesh or ISIS. They go by many names. They're on the rise again, aren't they? They were comprehensively defeated militarily in Syria and Iraq. But again, another thing the IR predicts is that there will be more failed states either in the Middle East or Africa. And we know Daesh is on the rise in Africa, across the continent, in the Sahel, West Africa, and also East Africa, as we saw in Mozambique quite recently. A very alarming attack. Took over a whole town and killed a lot of Western workers there. How likely is it at the moment, and how close are we seeing another Syria somewhere else, another failed state that Daesh might be able to take control of?
Look, it's I won't downplay the seriousness of the situation. I mean, at one level, we have been really successful against Daesh in its main, headquarters area in Iraq and Syria, and that pressure remains on them. I don't think they've recovered to anything like. You have to think back to where they were in 2014, holding swathes of territory. They're just not in that place, but they are resilient. We do have to keep the pressure on them, and of course, we've been doing that in Afghanistan against Al Qaeda pretty effectively the last 20 years. So we need to find ways of keeping that pressure on them. But you're right, this is a very toxic creed, but one which seems to be able to use modern social media really effectively to inspire parallel movements in different parts of the world. And what we're seeing in Mozambique is pretty disturbing, isn't it? And you can see where the local authorities are unable to exert appropriate control. Then the space opens up for these groups, and it's part of my service's job, of course, to try and go to those places, shine a light on some of the stuff going on there, and help to disrupt those groups. But we can only be part of a broader effort. I mean, you've got to back that up with work in the development space, work in conflict prevention, and that is the duty of diplomats and others. But our role is to try and get in there and make life as difficult as possible for these groups, and in particular disrupt any efforts by them to direct attacks against the United Kingdom.
Well, funny you should mention that, because the next question was going to be about Afghanistan, of course.
Right.
Chief Defence Staff Jonathan Nick Carter has expressed his concern and disappointment the US pull out militarily from Afghanistan by September the 11th this year, the 20th anniversary of the attacks on the Twin Towers. Do you also agree that not having a military presence in Afghanistan any longer makes it harder to disrupt terrorist attacks on the UK homeland?
Look, it's going to force us to have to work very differently. We have had a certain model of working, as I've just said. It's been pretty effective against Al Qaeda. We've been, the UK has supported the peace process, and we continue to do that. The fact is, the president has made his decision, and we have to now work with that. And so we're doing a lot of work, thinking through how we're going to achieve the same mission. But I'm very clear that there's been an awful lot of sacrifice, clearly. I think it's 457 servicemen have lost their lives in the Afghan campaign. So, we owe it to them to make sure that we, preserve some of the gains in security that we've achieved. And we will find a way of doing that. We're not going to go anywhere. We will find a way of working which is in a slightly different model, clearly, when you don't have the military on the ground alongside you. But we will find a way, because very clearly we can't allow Afghanistan to slide back to a situation that we saw in the run-up to 9/11. And that, for me, is one of those sort of very easy to state, very difficult to execute commitments, that we have no second 9/11. So we need to make sure we work with the Americans and others to ensure that doesn't happen.
Was your input into it, your advice to your counterpart, the director of the CIA, for example, to do just that, to stay in Afghanistan militarily? Is that what you wanted to see happen?
Well, Tom, I probably won't go into the sort of conversations I would have with the director of CIA, because otherwise I might not have very many of them. So, look, we work incredibly closely with our American partners, and they are as focused as we are on trying to make sure that a threat doesn't re-emerge from Afghanistan. So, that's what we'll do. We'll work together on it.
But the world is going to be less safe because of the US pullout.
I think it's difficult to judge. I mean, we'll have to see what happens. But I think in my business, you plan for the worst, and so you work through the scenarios that you need to. But I am really clear that there's a job to be done, continuing job to be done in Afghanistan, and we will have to find a way to do it.
Let's talk about Russia. there are currently 100,000 Russian troops on the Ukraine border. President Putin this week has also vowed to, and I quote, make his enemies sorry as never before if they cross his red lines. Do you believe an invasion is imminent of Russia into Ukraine, or is this some form of saber rattling?
Look, I don't think it's entirely clear what is in Mr. Putin's mind, and it may be that he's not made up his mind yet quite what he wants to do. But clearly what they've been doing around the borders of Ukraine is deeply worrying, because as you rightly say, Tom, this is the biggest build-up since the Cold War. It's larger than in 2014 when they invaded and annexed Crimea. So all we can do at this point is to signal really clearly to Moscow that if they, where our own, be very clear in our messaging, that he would pay a huge price if he did. And he's still paying it. The Russian people are still suffering from the sanctions that Putin brought upon them in 2014. So I hope that that he's not intending anything of that kind, but it is very worrying. And the problem with the Russians, as we've experienced here in Salisbury, about which I still get angry about Salisbury, because I know how near we came to very significant casualties. If you imagine what would have happened if a kid had come across that material and spread it around, and the family of Dawn Sturgis, of course, had an awful tragedy visited upon them when she was killed by it. So there is this element of recklessness there in the way they go about things, and we've just had this extraordinary story in Czechoslovakia. I mean, it's extraordinary if you think about it. It's the same group from Russian military intelligence, GRU. Same two individuals who came to Salisbury, involved in an attack on a factory which left 2 Czechs dead. So when you get that pattern of reckless behavior, of course you then look at what's happening around Ukraine, and of course it worries us, and it's why we've coordinated so closely with our allies to make sure we're getting firm messages back to President Putin.
And how have those firm messages been passed? I mean, politicians can make speeches, but are you communicating over other channels to make sure that the message is received loud and clear, that there will be some sort of recompense?
The Russians are in absolutely no doubt of where the UK stands on this issue, and they're in absolutely no doubt of where the Biden administration stands on this issue, because the channels are open. I mean,
who's told them? I wonder who's actually picked up the phone. Have you?
I have not picked up the phone, but I have ways of communicating what I need to do. But there are plenty of other channels, and we sit next to them in the UN Security Council as permanent members, and we are able to communicate with them. It's not, and we want to. This is not, at the end of the day, the sort of relationship we want to have with the Russians. It really isn't our choice. We would wish it were other than it is. But the point is, they keep on doing things, as they are doing around Ukraine at the moment, which are intimidatory and not really the behaviour of a responsible power. So you have to resist that as robustly as you can, whilst also attempting to engage with Moscow and to respect their role as well. I mean, it's not on this particular issue, but I'm perhaps it's one of those peculiar things of doing what I do for a living. I've met quite a few Russians, and I have a huge amount of affection for them. There is an element here of which we are trying to do, of putting ourselves in trying to imagine what is going on in Moscow, because there is both a pattern of reckless behavior, but it's also, if one looks at the history of Russia, you have to accept that there is also, they have the ability to misread the international situation quite badly. They in their own small circle, they sometimes don't understand signals as they should do. So that's why the clarity is really important to them. And sometimes they will imagine that things are going on that simply aren't. So I think, again, clarity of messaging and making sure that they get that is important.
We also know that Vladimir Putin turns to military interventions, acts of nationalism when he's feeling under pressure. We've seen that quite a lot in the past. he's under a lot of pressure now over the Navalny protests and that situation. Do you see this troop build-up on the Ukrainian border as an act of weakness?
I don't know what it is, but I said earlier on, Tom, intrinsically, Russia is a very challenged country. Its demographics is not good, its economy is not good. And clearly the treatment of Alexei Navalny, as we saw with the thousands of protesters on the streets of, not just Moscow, of a number of cities, shows that there's a deal of disaffection with Mr. Putin. So, but honestly, I don't know what's driving it, but I do know it's not welcome, and we really need the Russians to de-escalate.
Finally, Rush, you mentioned this GRU unit that carried out the attack on Colonel Skripal and also blew up the Czech arms factory. Unit 29155 is its rather catchy name. Safe to say this is a unit quite well on your radar. And what else do you know about it? It's effectively an assassination squad, isn't it?
Well, that is what it's there to do. And that's what it attempted with Sergei Skripal. And they were involved in this operation in Czechoslovakia. So, yeah, we're very aware of it. And we're very focused on trying to make sure that they are not able to cause the havoc that they would like to cause.
You've had success in that?
Yeah, look, I think we did, didn't we? So after Salisbury, we were able to mobilize a really big international coalition, and a large number, I think it was about 160 agents of theirs, of the Russians, were kicked out right across the world. So, that has a highly disruptive impact, and we will keep after them as long as they keep doing the sort of things they did in Salisbury.
Finally, China. It's been said to me in the past, sometimes by people in your former trade, that Russia is a real irritant these days, but China's the most serious strategic long-term threat, largely because China wants the 21st century to be the Chinese century, maybe like the 20th century was the American century. How big a problem does that pose for us here in the UK?
Well, look, as I said earlier on, the people who run China don't share our values. They have a very different value set, and they have a set of interests which collide with ours, and we see that playing out. Hong Kong being one of particular interest to the UK, where what they've been doing in Hong Kong is to unravel the agreement that they had with the UK to run it under under a system of two systems in one country, and that's been unraveling. And so quite clearly we have to respond to those sort of challenges, and we have to also be very clear that we're going to defend our academic freedom, that we're going to ensure that the technologies that we develop and our intellectual property is kept safe. And so we will take measures to try and ensure that is the case. But at the same time, as I say, China is a very complex issue. It's not a black and white issue. We want to be able to have a positive relationship with China. It's really important to both countries that we do, whether it's trade or whether it's particularly climate change. Because if we don't cooperate with the Chinese, then you are by definition not being able to work with a country whose economy will, in the next few years, become the largest economy in the world and is certainly the largest emitter. So we need to do that. So it's a balance, as always. And my service's job, I guess, is to help with the managing of the threat side and making sure that we defend and protect our interests. And it's, if you like, a sort of assurance, putting an assurance wrapper around the positive side of it. Climate change is a good example where people sign up to commitments on climate change, and it's perhaps our job to make sure that when people sign up to them, that actually what they're really doing reflects the what they've signed up to.
MI6's job to actually find out whether they're not emitting, you mean?
Well, it's our job to shine light in places where people might not want it shone, if you like. And so clearly we are going to support what is the foremost international foreign policy agenda item for this country and for the planet, which is around the climate emergency. And of course, we have a role in that space.
What do you mean by shining a light in areas that?
Well, it comes back to this point that if people, it's a bit like, I guess, what we've always done around arms control is that you aim to, what somebody said, trust but verify. And I guess in climate change or anything like that, where you need everyone to come on board and to play fair, then occasionally just a check to make sure they are playing fair is a useful thing to have.
So you have someone maybe in a field with some sort of technical device measuring an emission.
I'm loving the image, Tom, but I'm not sure that's quite what we're doing.
Okay, I won't try and ask what you are doing, because again, I suspect for a good reason you'll probably tell me not. Look, you've been very, very good with your time. We must wrap up, but I have to ask you finally, not least because my 11-year-old son has been bugging me about this and wanted me to ask you. Have you seen the new James Bond film yet? No one in the world appears to have. And is there any way you can organise some sort of screening for your staff that you could perhaps invite me to?
I have not seen it. I'm really looking forward to it. As you know, as we talked about with Bond is a double-edged thing for us, but it's inescapable, and I'm very much looking forward to the next film. I love the films. It doesn't bear much relation to the reality of what we do. Oh, bits and pieces. But we talked about Q earlier on. There are sort of elements, echoes sometimes of that. But no, James Bond is wonderfully insubordinate to M, isn't he? And I feel that that doesn't go on in my own service.
Do you have a money penny?
I think that my wonderful private office, I'm not entirely sure how they'd react to being described as moneypenny.
I have to say, it did worry me this week. Your Rob's number MI5, Ken McCullum, said it was time to cast off the martini drinking stereotypes of spies. And what is the world coming to if you can't have a vodka martini shaken, not stirred anymore?
Well, there you go. There is. I'm not sure MI5 is entitled to start taking away James Bond from us and martini drinking and all that. But I'll let Ken off on this occasion.
Rich Moore, thank you so much for talking to us on G&T this morning. You've been very, very interesting indeed.
Thank you very much.